Hello and welcome to another edition of our Throwback Thursday. So glad you could join us. And this is a time, if you're not familiar with the Throwback Thursdays, where we take a look back. We look back on kind of where we've been with a recent message series, and provide some opportunity for clarity, maybe digging deeper or stepping into how we do what we've learned, the idea of kind of applying it a little bit more. So it's an opportunity to look back at where we've been. And so we're throwing back to this last Sunday. And this last Sunday, we finished up our series called Seeing Red. This is our idea of kind of talking about anger, why we get angry, why God gets angry, and what do we do with it. And we dug through it for 7 weeks. And this last week was an interesting one. This last week, we dealt with the subject of racism. We had a wonderful guest who helped us out. That was Carl Edwards from CrossNet Ministries nearby in New Holland, Pennsylvania, a good buddy of mine. And he shared from his heart. And what I want to do is I wanted to kind of catch us back up. So if you haven't had a chance to participate in this series, feel free to go back on our website. There are links there, but on YouTube and Facebook, you can connect in, see some of our past videos, past messages that will get you caught up. So if you haven't had a chance to do that, you can find the links there in the description below. But yeah, kind of catch up with us. Take a moment and review if you haven't had a chance to do that. And especially if you haven't seen this Sunday's episode, as it were, go ahead back and look at that, because this will make kind of more sense there. But what I want to do is kind of a quick overview. Perhaps you did miss it and you're just trying to get an idea of what was going on. So here's where we were. We were looking about the fact, and each week we've kind of talked about this, the fact that I need to care more about the person I'm talking with or about than the point I'm trying to make. So often when we get angry, we get so focused on why we're right, why what we're saying is true and good, and it very well may be that we forget about the person. And the thing is, Jesus didn't die to save points. He died to save people. And although the points are important, the people are more. And we said again kind of this way, the fact that it's more important in how I'm right than if I'm right. Now, if we're looking at it that way, we're kind of assuming, yeah, maybe my position is right, but it's more important how I go about being right than the fact that I am. And that's really, really important for us. So we kind of built a filter over the weeks about how we run our thoughts and actions and whatnot through this idea of being right. And then when we get angry over things that might not be right, and how we're dealing with it, each week we built kind of a different stage in this filter of how we think through what we say, what we do, what we think. And this was our last one. We said, I should ask the question, am I creating justice? Not just valuing, not just even maybe doing, but am I literally creating justice in my little corner of the world that shows off God's loving kindness, his loving faithfulness, and a humble life with God? And this is really rooted in Micah 6. You can read that for yourself. We said that this is a filter. So when I'm engaging with topics, when I'm engaging with people on topics, am I, and especially at that beginning, am I working to create justice? Not just like getting someone back when they did something wrong, but really setting right, making whole those who have been hurt and broken and those kind of things, because that's really the biblical concept of justice. And you can look back over some of our previous messages. We've really talked about that the heart of biblical justice is more about setting right the wrongs done to others than about kind of getting retribution when things have been done wrongly. That can be part of it, but the heartbeat of it is helping those who are in a place of brokenness, who are in a place of hurting, a place who have been maybe victimized or oppressed, and helping them come back to wholeness and bring healing and life into their life. Well, now, I would want to say this. From our discussion of racism this last week, this is our kind of my big point for us, that Christianity is completely, wholly incompatible with any kind of racism. And this is something we got to really dig into because it's part of our national discussion. And honestly, it's really a global discussion. But Christianity, for those of us who claim Jesus, claim Christ, if we say we're followers of Jesus, there is no place in that Christian life for racism, of any kind. And we dug on that to a little bit, and this is a discussion that we're going to have to continue to have ongoing, but really the biblical evidence does not allow for any kind of racism. So, what do we do now? Well, I want to suggest that we review what Carl shared with us. He gave us 4 steps. We can't dig into all of them here, but here's what he said. Show up and be present. Be there. Engage the conversation. Connect with those who maybe have felt the sting and the injury of racism. He said to weep with those who weep. This is a biblical concept. This is the idea that when those in this world who are suffering, who are in sorrow, we come alongside of them and we validate that suffering. We say, it matters, you matter, and this isn't right. We lament with them. Then he suggests that we carry the burden, that we do what we can in our spheres to make a difference. Not just to give well wishes, but to put legitimate action to what we're doing. And then lastly, to love unconditionally. And we say that a lot. We say that that's really the heartbeat of being a follower of Jesus, and it is. But sometimes it's really hard to do that because we want to put conditions, is this person worthy of it? Is this person, did they do something to deserve where they're at? And what he was saying was just love without condition, because that's how God loved us. And if God loved us that way, we should love others. So I think we need to look a little bit deeper into this. Now, we don't have enough time to really dig into this. It's going to be an ongoing conversation for us. But I figured it would be important for us to look at maybe some of the things that, for those of us, and if we're honest, as a church family, Grace Church in Ephrata, Pennsylvania, we could be described as a very white church. There's not a lot of racial, ethnic diversity in our church. And that's not bad, but it does come with its own set of weaknesses, kind of blinders. We see things from only our perspective in our white culture. And again, that's not bad, but we have to look and we have to dig into the process of gaining deeper understanding. So I'm going to do something maybe that's going to be hard, and maybe might even get some pushback on here, but I think it's important for us. And I want us to deal with some of our triggers. And what I mean by that is there's certain things that we as a white culture, and I'm not trying to say in any way that I'm an expert on racism or racial issues or racial reconciliation. I'm right in this with you guys, figuring out kind of where I'm at, where I need to be, what Jesus wants from me, from my family, from our church. But there's some certain things that seem to crop up that kind of halt the discussion, halt us moving forward into this godly thing of racial reconciliation that I really think the Bible speaks clearly about, that we're supposed to be about that. So I want to deal with some triggers, things that come up that when we hear them in our white context that seem to halt the conversation, we get thrown off balance. And I'm not going to fully discuss them. I just want to throw them out there and say that maybe when these things come up, we need to take a step back before we become instantly defensive and say, where is the truth in this discussion? Where's the truth in these words and these concepts, and how can we engage in them in a civil and a loving way? Again, using this filter, things like being kind and forgiving and compassionate, remembering the mercy we've been shown. The concept that we're supposed to create mercy. That's what God requires of us. That's what Micah 6:8 was telling us, that God requires of us what is good, that we create. It says do in many translations, do justice, but that word in its original context really meant create or build or manufacture justice. What am I doing to put the pieces together to make justice happen? So let's throw these out there. Again, we're not going to fully dissect them, but just to throw them out there. And the first one is this issue of microaggression. And when this is shared, this is the concept that little things throughout the day that have some minor racial overtones, particularly coming from those of us who are in the majority culture, majority race, can throw out there, not with necessarily any ill intent, but that it has racial overtones, that it tips back into some racial things that we don't think about, but it builds and it creates this sense of being oppressed, this sense of being pushed down. When we hear this, it can become easy to try to push it off. But I want to suggest that when people talk about microaggressions, they're talking about this real life, ongoing experience that they've had with life. Let's not dismiss it. Let's ask, what does that look like and why? Here's another one that can, kind of hitch us up: systematic racism. And there are many who would say this just doesn't exist. And whether or not it does, we should be willing to engage the process, and we should engage the discussion using that filter. Are we thinking of others when they're saying, I experience a systematic racism or institutional racism, those kind of concepts? We can't just go, well, no, that's just not true. Let's ask, why do you feel that's real? What have you experienced? What's your story been? Are there things that I'm doing maybe that make that a reality? Are we willing to at least engage discussion? Because quite frankly, if we believe it doesn't exist and we believe that's truth, then it can stand up to reasonable discussion, reasonable and compassionate exchange. We don't have to just say, no, that doesn't exist, and resort to talking points. Can we engage people when they say that they've actually experienced that? Here's another one: white privilege. And Carl talked about this a little bit during his discussion. It's not this idea of saying you're privileged, you've had all this wonderful stuff given to you and you've never had anything bad. It was really around the idea of how society looks at you in regard to your skin color. And one of the most telling was he talked about the talk that he has with his kids, and that in the African American people, persons of color community, and I've had this shared with me several times now by those who fit into those demographics. They said that they have to talk to their kids about being safe around certain individuals in authority, because if they don't, they could suffer harm, physical harm. And they say, be respectful, do this, do that, to make sure that you don't encounter that. And that's just something that I have never had to think of for my boys. But when you're engaging, at least from the experience that people of color have shared with me and with others, that they have to. It just goes with it. It's something that they have to think about that I don't. It's just kind of the way that society interacts. And we need to be willing to engage that. And again, can we do it with compassion? Even if we believe, again, it doesn't exist, can we have that discussion in a way that validates someone else's experience, what they've been through? And lastly, here's one that's really, and I'm not going to get into the politics of it, but it's really charged politically, this phrase, Black Lives Matter. And again, I don't want to talk about the politics of it. I don't want to talk about the official movement, but this notion where those who are part of the Black community, the African American community, when they say that we feel like our lives don't matter, are we helping that? Are we being Christ-like when we just brush it aside and throw it down? Couldn't we rather say, why do you feel that way? What can I do to validate the image of God in you? And I think that's what it means, because I can say that, yes, Black lives do matter. People will, especially in the white community, will throw back, well, all lives matter. Sure they do. But it's this idea, and I've had it shared to me a number of ways, but if someone's house is on fire and they say, hey, can you help? My house is on fire. You don't say, well, all houses matter, right? Wait, there's one house that's on fire, you got to deal with that. And that's what the lived experience of so many within the Black community have shared, that they feel like their lives don't matter for a variety of reasons. What can we do to dispel that notion? Because I'll tell you this, all lives do matter. Black lives matter to Jesus. So if those who are in that community feel like that their lives don't matter, I think Jesus would want us to say, what can we do to change that? Because their lives do matter to Jesus, and therefore those lives matter to us, right? We're all creating God's image. We are all invited to be part of God's family. So these things can all be triggers, things that, again, I'm not trying to solve all the issues around them or necessarily validate one for it or against it. I want us to be willing to consider it and say, if these things are out there, can we engage with them with compassion and mercy? Can we do more than just brush them off and throw a few talking points at them? Because I believe at the end of it, we see red for a lot of reasons. But I think so often we see red because we're scared. We're fearful of losing what we have or of the unknown or what might be different. And quite frankly, God has called us to a great and a glorious life of abundance in him, both here now today and for all eternity. But we let these fears and these worries and these anxieties get in the way, and they manifest, quite frankly, by pushing others down. Because if others are pushed down, then we don't feel that pressure on us. And most likely none of us are actively engaged in any of that like overt racism. But the thing about overt racism, it's easy to spot and easy to push at. What we discussed was the fact that it can be under the surface and completely unintentional. What can we do to look deeply into that and say, is there a way to do this that better lines up with who Jesus is? Can we use the filter that when these issues and we engage in, we start to get angry and defensive, that the filter steps in? And for one of them, quite frankly, remember that filter from Philippians 2, where he said that we consider others more important than ourselves. If we're fronting with that, if we're starting with that others are more important than me, which Philippians 2 tells us to do, consider others more significant than yourselves, Ephesians 2 tells us. If we're doing that, it changes how we approach it. It changes how we discuss it. Church family, we have to be those kind of people that are willing to front with grace and mercy and compassion and kindness and forgiveness. Can we be those people? I think we need to be. And like I've said many times, if we start doing it this way, if we really push hard into the Jesus way of doing it, we're going to see a revolution, a godly revolution in our community, in our church family, but in our broader community. Church family, I'm so grateful to be part of you. I'm so grateful to be your pastor. Let's keep thinking through this, keep engaging it. If you've got thoughts, feel free to drop them in the comments below. We're excited to be on this journey, and quite frankly, this week we're gonna be doing a big celebration on Sunday, and we'll be telling you a little bit more about that. But we're celebrating what God has been doing in our church family, and I'm excited to be part of you and part of that celebration. Let's keep moving ahead into what Jesus has for us. And the way we say it, it's helping people live Jesus-centered lives. Let's live Jesus-centered lives when it comes to how we engage and discuss and make justice when it comes to areas of things like racism. Thanks for being a great church family. I love you. We'll talk to you again real soon.